All right, thanks for flagging that, Laura. I know there's a lot of people who are excited to watch this later. So, all right, so with that, welcome everybody. We are really thrilled to have you here with us this evening to discuss two very important ballot initiatives. My name is Erica Smitka. I am the Deputy Director of the League of Women Voters of New York State. And I'm happy to be joined tonight by Donna Harris of Delta Sigma Theta. I'll turn it over to Donna to set the stage for our webinar this evening in just a minute. As I said, just a couple of housekeeping things. Make sure you're on mute, and if you have any questions, you can plug those questions into the chat, and we will make sure those questions get answered after both presenters present. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Donna.
So welcome to everyone to this webinar. I'm Donna Harris. I'm the Upstate Social Action Coordinator for Delta Sigma Theta Sorority. Delta Sigma Theta Sorority was founded in 1915 at Howard University in Washington, D.C. Our focus is on sisterhood, scholarship, service, and social action. We are a nonpartisan organization. The Upstate Social Action Committee as a partner consists of alumni and collegiate chapters in Western New York, including Appalachian, Albany, Buffalo, Ithaca, Rochester, and Syracuse alumni chapters, as well as collegiate members on the campuses of SUNY Albany, Buffalo, Binghamton, University of Rochester, SUNY Brockport, Rochester Institute of Technology, and Cornell University. We thank our national partner, the League of Women Voters of New York State, as a partner for this event. The purpose of this evening is to get our New York residents, our membership, to flip the ballot, understand the ballot propositions, proposals, and we want you to be prepared to make informed decisions when you vote. So thank you for coming tonight, and I'll turn it back to Erica.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Donna. So this evening, we are happy to be joined by both Laura Franz from the New York State United Teachers Union and Patrick Woods from Albany Law School. Laura Franz is, as I said, from the New York State United Teachers Union. She is on the board of directors, and she's also a president of the Albany Public School Teachers Association. She has a very long history of education advocacy on both the local, state, and national levels, and we're happy to have her here with us this evening. We are also joined by Patrick Woods, who is Deputy Director of the Government Law Center at Albany Law School. Prior to being in his current position, Mr. Woods was Assistant Solicitor General in the Albany office of the New York State Attorney General, and we are also thrilled to have Patrick here with us. So thank you both so much for joining us. I will first hand it over to Laura to talk about the small city school debt limit proposal.
Thank you so much, Erica. Thanks everyone for having me here this evening. I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak to you about Proposition 1, in particular the small city debt limit. I have a small slideshow that I'm going to share to kind of talk me through my talking points. Even for me, I have to admit it took me some time to like wrap my head around this. So I want to make sure I'm doing my due diligence, and hopefully everyone can see my screen. Thumbs up, Erica. Yes, everybody can see that. Great. So this year, Proposition 1 proposes to align the New York State Constitution to allow for small city school districts to raise the debt ceiling to the same levels as their suburban and rural counterparts. It proposes to remove, whoops, I clicked out of something. Nope. Sorry, did somebody else share?
Every election online going back to 1995.
Okay. There we go. I think I'm back. It would remove the 5% debt ceiling limit on small city school districts. This would impact 57 districts throughout New York State, including those districts you can see locally, my own included, Albany, Amsterdam, Cohoes, Rensselaer, Saratoga Springs, Troy, and Watervliet. That's approximately 8% of all school districts and approximately an enrollment of 200,000 students. Move that forward. In looking at that, it would allow the districts to raise their ceiling debt cap to the same 10%. So currently, small cities districts like my own in Albany can only borrow 5% against their overall projected tax-based income in the city. The New York City can borrow 10%. Rural and suburban districts like Bethlehem, Guilderland, those that surround my area can borrow 10%. And then large cities such as Rochester and Syracuse can borrow 9%. So if we wanted to borrow more than the 5% in those small city districts, they'd need to get approval from the New York State Board of Regents. There's all these other like barriers, all these other steps. Get permission from the New York State Comptroller. They'd have to put it to the vote to the public that would have to pass by a supermajority. And then the project would have to be labeled as exceeding the constitutional debt limit. Another component around this is that the current law, the way it's currently structured, allows for non-small city school districts to subtract their New York State aid before computing that debt limit. And then small city school districts aren't allowed to do that. So I've put together a really small example here to kind of put it in action. This really helped me visualize it. Let's pretend that my district, Albany, and a suburban district around here wanted to make $30 million of safety and security improvements. We want to invest in a capital project. For the sake of this example, we're going to pretend we have the same enrollment, we operate under the same budget, and we have about property values that are about 500 million. Beyond that, our state aid that would be allowed to put towards this $30 million project would be $21 million. In the suburban district, they have a 10% debt limit. So they could borrow up to $50 million overall without having to go out to a vote around that. They are also then allowed to subtract their $21 million in state aid from that debt limit because they're not actually borrowing that $21 million. The $21 million is what state aid is already being channeled to that project. So they only would need to borrow $9 million then, which only is about 18% of their overall debt limit. In a small city local, at a 5% debt limit, we would only be able to borrow $25 million. So we're already over the $30 million capital project that we've proposed. We cannot subtract the $21 million from state aid that we know we're getting towards that project, and we'd exceed our limit and have to go and put that out to a vote. So we've gone beyond what our debt limit already would be. And so it creates this fiscal inequity and the amount of borrowing power that districts have, even from one neighborhood that's right next door to another neighborhood. In preparing this, you know, sort of the ask was, what were some of the pros and cons? Certainly not, you know, weighing in one way or the other around that. The biggest pros were around sort of creating equity and strengthening the borrowing position. The cons, and this was me sort of looking everywhere, is there really aren't any. It isn't going to raise taxes. It doesn't take away your ability as taxpayers or the voters' ability to vote on school budgets. And capital projects would still need to be approved. And looking at the list of supporters, you can see who is already in support of. In doing a pretty, not much keyboard search, there's not too many detractors out there from the why not to. Although the last time this referendum did come for a vote, it did not succeed. So I am trying to, I hope that was fairly unbiased and would, within my time frame, and would be happy to, that's what I've got for you around the small city debt limit presentation.
Thank you so much, Laura. That was fantastic.
Can we ask questions?
No, we're actually gonna hold off until we do both presentations, and then we'll open the floor for questions. But for
Okay.
now, I'm keeping a running tally of any questions that we do have. For people who are plugging them in the chat, I've got a.
Okay, I'll put it in the chat. 'Cause I
ready.
don't understand what's the difference with the small city. What's that?
Oh yes, yeah. Plug that question in the chat, and we'll make sure to get to it right after. Thanks so much, Laura. I know it was. We found just some difficulty finding information on both these ballot initiatives, and so I think it's really really great to be able to see both sides there. So all right, and so I am gonna go back to sharing my screen just to let folks know this is what the question will look like for small city school districts when you see it on your ballot. When you flip that ballot over, and you're going to see it on the back of your ballot, and unless you live in Nassau County, and that's what the question will look like. So with that, I will hand it over to Patrick, who's going to talk about the debt limit for sewage facilities. Patrick?
Hi, good evening, everyone. Hold on. Very pleased to be here to talk about the sexiest of all ballot initiatives, the sewer limit amendment. I will give you, I don't have a PowerPoint presentation for you. I will give you sort of the bottom line, which is that a yes vote on this amendment is a yes vote to continue the current status quo. It's to continue the way things are going. So to explain why that is, as you heard with respect to small city school districts, the New York State Constitution places borrowing limits on a bunch of different things, but on particularly also on localities. It's counties, cities, towns, smaller municipalities. There are certain exceptions to those borrowing limits that are built into the Constitution. The two that I'll highlight for you, because I think one is informative on the other, both came in 1963. One was complete exclusion for water debt. So borrowing to make sure there's safe water is not subject to the debt limit. You can just subtract that from your debt when you're figuring out your total locale debt limit. And sewage debt. The difference is that the sewage debt had an expiration date. Originally, that expiration date was 1973, right? Technically, January 1, 1974, but 10 years. The thinking at the time was that there was a sort of statewide push to improve our sewer systems. And the idea was that by putting a 10-year limit on the exclusion of the debt, that would light a fire under municipalities to get on it and start doing sewage treatment improvements. I will leave it to you how successful that plan was, given that every 10 years since, we have amended the Constitution again to push the debt limit out, the expiration out another 10 years. So in the 70s, we pushed it to the 80s, 80s, we pushed it to the 90s, 90s, we pushed it to the 2000s. We are now at the point where we are in the 20s, and we're looking to push it to the 30s.
Yeah.
So a yes vote changes literally the date that is in the Constitution for when the exclusion expires. A no vote's consequences are not quite as clear. I mean, it's clear that localities will no longer be able to exclude this debt from their total debt calculations. What impact that has in the real world will vary from locality to locality. It seems likely that there are probably localities that I see a question in the chat that I would love to address in a minute. It'll depend on sort of what long-term planning related to their sewer debt various localities have entered into, and when those projects contracts have been finalized. Given where we are this year, I think it's fair to say that if they haven't been yet, they're unlikely to in time. But it will vary. There may be some localities where a no vote is going to be pretty disruptive to their budgeting process or their long-term budget plans, depending on what kind of new sewage debt they're planning to take on. I will say that this has been, if there's a sort of an uncontroversial constitutional amendment, in the past 60 years, this has been it. It has consistently passed with very little opposition. This trip through the legislature, literally nobody voted against it, which is surprising to me. I would have figured somebody would vote against it just on principle. But that's where it is. But that said, it did almost fail at the polls once. When it was up in 1993, it passed only by 50.5% of the electorate. I'm not really sure why that was. It may have just been sort of the general national sentiment at the time that was pretty debt hawkish. But it's possible, based on history, that it could fail at the polls based on at least one time that it came up where it nearly did. The one thing that I will add is that there is, like many constitutional amendments of this type, there's going to need to be conforming legislation passed by the legislature in order to fully effectuate the amendment. Local finance law 12410 also has the same time period limit in the statute that will need to be changed in order for it to be fully in effect. Although, given how uncontroversial the constitutional amendment was, I suspect that will be a relatively easy trip through the legislature for that conforming amendment. And that's what I have for you tonight.
Great, thank you so much, Patrick. We've already got a lot of questions that have been put into the chat. So without further ado, we're going to jump right into the question and answer section. I'll hand it over to Donna to moderate that.
Okay, so the first question is, what was the original reason for the lower amount of debt? And I believe that goes to Laura.
Yeah, I think so. Not having all the moving pieces on this, but essentially as a small city district, we historically didn't always have to put our budgets out for a vote. So in the mid 80s, the legislature started to even out the rules, so to speak, between suburban, urban, rural, small city districts. And when we went out to, like, we're alike in almost every way now in terms of fiscal accountability, budget votes, tax levies, all of those kinds of things. The only thing that didn't get evened out was the debt spending limit. But I think the original point of that was because we didn't need to go out for a budget vote, the cap was put on.
Thank you. There was a question about, are the slides available? And the video recording of this event, as well as the slides, will be available on the League of Women Voters website tomorrow. When was the last time this came before the voters? And I believe that's the
That's another question for Laura.
Is it for Laura or me and Patrick as
So
well?
a similar, so in the con slide, a similar amendment was put before the voters in 2003. It failed with 54.2% of the public voting against the amendment. And this is from Patrick's organization, the Government Law Center has an explainer around this, and there's no information readily available as to why it failed. We believe it was probably connected to some wording and some not clear understanding, and New York City really had a lot of influence around the vote. And there is no information that indicates the existence of a coordinated campaign against the continuation of it.
So what is categorized as a small school district? And there's an answer in the chat. It's characterized as less than $125,000. Is that correct, Laura?
Residents, yes.
150 residents, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Who will be voting on this? Everyone or just voters in small cities?
Everybody. On both ballot proposals, not to speak for Patrick, but I already saw that answer in the chat too, so.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead, Don.
How and why did the disparity in debt limits for small city school districts versus everyone else come about? As in, I can't see the whole thing. There was a reason that there was a lower cap that was put in place vis-a-vis other types of school districts.
So I think that's back to that kind of historical the rules around the budgets and having voters vote on budgets when we didn't have to, when small city districts didn't have to put their budgets out to a vote. I think that's a little bit of the history around it.
Erica, did you want to jump in?
Just a question for both of you. Has the comptroller weighed in on either of these proposals?
You want to talk about yours first, Laura?
No, he has not. So, and I'm told historically wouldn't necessarily. So
with respect to the sewage one, I think yes, and I'm putting it that way because the introducer's memorandum in the legislature makes reference to a comptroller's memorandum that is in support of the amendment. And the reason I say we think so is because of that. We did make an attempt to get a hold of that memo, both from the legislature and by foiling the comptroller's office, without success. So if we want to believe the introducer, which I think we probably should, there is a memo out there that exists with the comptroller supporting the sewer debt limit amendment, but I can't tell you exactly what's in it because I've never been able to get a hold of it.
So what discussion have been had to either permanently exclude sewage debt or to actually upgrade the system so as to make this unnecessary?
So to my knowledge, I agree with you. At this point, it seems to make sense to either just take the limit out or take the exclusion out, like take the expiration date out or take the exclusion out. But that's not what we have on the ballot in front of us this year. I mean, you could vote against it and that takes the whole thing out effectively. In terms of, I'm not aware of any discussions that have happened around sort of the just take the expiration date out topic. It's possible they've happened and I don't know that they did. This amendment, again, is one that seems to just be done the same way every 10 years. And it may be that nobody's, wanted to mess with it, that, rather than just doing the same thing again, which is a relatively safe. Rather than, sorry. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Sorry, it was muting and unmuting, rather than trying to do something more, at least apparently significant. To answer the second part of the question, I'm not sure that there's ever going to be a point in time where the exclusion is unnecessary because all the upgrades are finished. I think that those sort of upgrades and necessary maintenance things are going to be ongoing for any district, especially as we hope technology on all of those things continues to improve.
So just a clarification, Patrick. So a yes vote just increases the expiration date.
Precisely. A yes vote, all this amendment does is change the expiration date. It pushes it out an additional 10 years. A yes vote is keep it going the way it is for another 10 years.
Does a sewage exclusion apply to any size municipality?
I believe so.
This is a question for you, Erica. Once the videos are up, can we reference them on social media?
Yes, yep, it's okay to circulate these videos on social media. We definitely want as many voters as possible to know about these amendments and to, again, remember to flip their ballots this year.
Is there a focus to also require sewage facilities to actually provide sewage disposable to individual homes? There are some public health departments that don't think that that don't think that it is their job.
So I think what this question is getting at has to do sort of with the merits of municipal sewers, who should be responsible for making sure there's municipal sewage, if there's going to be municipal sewage. As we know, upstate, not everybody even has municipal sewage. Some folks have septic. What I would say is that doesn't really have anything to do with the amendment that's on the ballot this year. The wisdom of whether there should or shouldn't be capital sewage projects is a separate question from whether municipalities, if they do want to have them, should have to count those expenses toward their municipal debt limit.
So if we had the plain language bill signed and in place, how would these proposals read?
I can take that one, Donna. That's a great question, Kate. So the plain language bill, for folks who aren't aware, is a bill that was passed this past session, which would mean that any ballot proposal would need to read at the level of an 8th grade reading level to hopefully make ballot proposals more understanding for more voters when they get to the polls. So the folks over at the State Board of Elections used the guidelines of the plain language bill when they were writing the ballot language this year. It's not perfect. It doesn't line up exactly with the law because the law is not in effect yet, but they did their best. So I don't have an answer for exactly what that would look like, but we hope to see ballot proposals in the future that are make a little bit more sense to the lay person showing up to the polls after work someday. So
can I chime in on one thing there, which is that at least for the sewage debt one, I'm not sure that plain language, I think it's relatively plainly written. The problem is that the topic it's about is relatively arcane. So without providing the background, it can be plain on its face in terms of what the words mean. But if you don't really understand that there are constitutional debt limits, what an exclusion to those are, then it's going to be hard to write it without providing a bunch of additional background.
absolutely, yeah, which is why things like this are so important. I know that we are right at time, and if it's okay with our two presenters, we just have two final questions. Okay, so our first will go to you, Laura. So if small city school districts are defined as less than 125,000 inhabitants, how would you define a rural school district?
I don't know, but let's put that in the pin and I'll definitely email you that back because I want to make sure I give you the real definition. I'm not going to make something up. So
I can add something there. The definition of small city school district comes from the state constitution, and the provision is specifically for small city school districts in the state constitution, and that is defined as 125,000 inhabitants or fewer. I don't think that there is, at least in that section of the Constitution, a separate definition of rural. And in fact, I would think most small city school districts are rural in the sense that they have under 125,000 inhabitants in the district.
So we've got one final question for you, Patrick. I'm going to try to kind of combine these two. So would a no vote on the sewage debt limit prohibit or hamper municipalities from upgrades? And the other question that kind of goes with it is, do you have an idea of which districts might be negatively impacted if this proposal were not to pass, and how much of an impact would that have?
So the answer to the first question is yes, if in order to do the upgrades they want to do, they would need to exceed the debt limit applicable to that locality. So no, if it's not going to push them over the constitutional cap, but yes, if doing it is going to push them over the constitutional cap. In terms of which localities are going to be affected, the answer to that is I don't know. One of the things that we did try to find out, and we foiled the comptroller's office to try to get this information without success in time, was precisely that question based on what they had, but we didn't get an answer in time, and I don't think we will before election day. So for that one, what I would suggest is ask your local finance, your local elected officials, what happens to the budget if it fails? Because they will know the answer to that for where you live, and I won't.
Thanks, Patrick. Thanks, Laura. I'll hand it back over to Donna to talk about the survey and close this out.
Okay. Thank you so much. I actually need to make a clarification. I may have misspoke earlier. Delta Sigma Theta sorority was founded in 1913. And so we have the evaluation. It's a short survey to get feedback about the webinar. We plan to do this next year, and so we just want your feedback as we think about pulling this together, and we want to make sure that it was valuable to you. And so I put it in the chat, and if you could just quickly complete the evaluation, we would surely appreciate it. Do we have the last slide, Erica, that has some resources?
Yes, actually, I think what I'll do is we have a list of resources that y'all can use to learn, even more about both of these topics. And so we'll send out an email with that list of resources along with the link to the survey that Donna put in the chat, as well as the PowerPoint slides and a link to the recording of this. So you'll get all that tomorrow at some point. And I guess that's where we end. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. Really appreciate it. And thank you so much to our presenters and to Delta Sigma Theta for co-sponsoring the event with us today. We all really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, everybody.